the emptiness. That is what they called it. We had searched for so long for others and had found nothing. Barely even non-sentient life could be found. And even then, usually sparse and primitive, think Cambrian period life forms. Hundreds of thousands of inhabitable worlds around the right kind of stars, and yet the Milky Way was so empty, barren, and they called it the emptiness. We had arisen from old Terra so many years ago, constantly expanding, constantly exploring, and we had found very little to indicate any living sentient life forms. Sure, there had been some signs. The storm monoliths at the bottom of the flooded world of Primo 3, the principles of Euclidean geometry craved several kilometers deep into the moon of the colony of Onei the silent tower found orbiting the black hole at the center of the galaxy. But whoever had built them had been long gone, and never to return. And even then, some believed they had merely been attempts by the Terran Colonial Federation, or perhaps the original Terran Empire, to keep the masses from freaking out. And thus, slowly, mankind spread, waxing and waning in power, as civil wars, empires, interstellar anarchy, and we were alone. We had others, in time. Androids with souls of silicon, uplifted animals which were pretty much crows and raccoons, being that dolphins didn't have the appendages, the dogs weren't smart enough, the chimps had a tendency towards violent sociopathy of the eat faces kind, and the cats got so out of hand that Fel 2 had to be nuked from orbit. It was the only way to be sure. But all sentience, human or human-made, had come from one place. No non-Terran animals were ever close to sentience. There were wars, conflicts, the usual. Japan just lifted their islands away from old Terra one day. Most of the Western European nations were destroyed in the Fifth Interstellar War. Africa became so unspeakably rich from their colonies that their colonies rebelled and formed the first pure colonial off-Terra nation. Nobody wants to talk about what happened in China. Thankfully, they had off-world colonies. The Nordics just plain left one day, never explaining why, but took their Terran-based and colonial population into the furthest reaches of the galaxy. Weren't seen for 1,000 years after that. New religions sprang up declaring Terran life superior. Others said that the rapture had happened, and we had not been worthy. Some said that the Great Filter might have been a lot more difficult to get through than previously thought. Others said that life was a mistake, which was why it was rare, and sentient life unique. But all agreed, we were alone. Until the various nations of the TCF revealed a new improvement in interstellar travel, a new engine, strong and efficient enough to reach another galaxy and return. Utilizing previously unresearched methods with bio-AI integration, antimatter fuel, and something called a jump warp method of travel, the Leif Erikson was outfitted. A sleek, long enormous ship, big as a freighter, but built like a cruiser, armed with kinetic mass drivers, plasma launchers and such, but also with science decks, hospitals, schools, a college, parks, and space for a population of nearly 1 million, though it was doubtful it would get filled up. An expedition to Andromeda, the closest of all galaxies in our area of space, was planned, with all nations contributing to the more than 50,000-strong crew of scientists, navigators, doctors, soldiers, engineers, and diplomats, hoping to find anything at all, though nobody expected us to find life. And nobody expected us to find so much. Life, so rare in the Milky Way, was so rich and varied, we found, and yet it wasn't easy. When we landed in the outer reaches of the Andromeda galaxy, we found verdant, wild worlds, with life as complex as old Terra's. Strange fungoid worlds, worlds where the night was lit in the faint glow of bioluminescent plants and animals, worlds of rolling plains, worlds of deep and beautiful oceans, covered in a band of corals around its equator. But we also found signs of sentient life. Research stations, quickly abandoned, booby-trapped mining stations, wrecks of primitive chemically driven crafts. We finally found an operational base, though as we attempted to communicate, the aliens, to our horror, killed themselves. We didn't understand. Not until the second time we encountered living aliens. We had found another ship, dead in the cold darkness of space. Minimal life support, breathable atmosphere. Dead aliens were at this point fairly standard for us. We figured perhaps a terrible war was happening, saddening us all greatly, as the wars that had torn Terra and her many people apart were not yet forgotten entirely. But aboard this ship, we found something else. Not an adult alien, but a small child. Slightly avian-looking, though with a total of 5 eyes, feathers, but a mouth like a mammal. It saw us, and it was terrified. I was the one to approach first, gently, very gently. I grasped the child, thin and sickly looking as it was, in my arms. Even through my containment suit, I could feel its little heart beating when it shivered. We took it with us. What else could we do? It was amazing in some aspect to find a living alien. Took us a while to work out that any bacteria it had wouldn't affect us, though the opposite wasn't true. Even with our advanced medical science, it took days for us to synthesize vaccines that would work on its alien biology. After that, we could interact with it. Well, her, or whatever was the closest biological counterpart after we did not share any ancestry. She was scared, more like a beaten animal at first than anything, flinching from every sound, carefully watching every move you made, as if she thought we'd pounce the moment she looked away. It was worrying. Human and alien psychology probably has a lot of differences between them, but if the kid had been of Terran ancestry, it'd seem awfully similar to a kid from a war zone with PSTD. And even as we attempted to communicate with our new friend, others appeared. Not as friendly. Ships came straight at us, firing primitive atomic missiles, easily neutralized by our PDS and trying to flee when that didn't work. Surgically, we destroyed their engines and boarded their ships. These were somewhat like a bizarre mixture between a lizard and a possum in appearance. We shot to stun, while they tried using ancient lever-action rifles on us. Some killed themselves, but most were captured, vaccinated, and kept as prisoners, until we could find out what they wanted, or what was going on. At last, we did get some success. The avian-looking kid was beginning to learn how to speak our language, though hers escaped us. It was odd. She had been some kind of slave, the nature of which we couldn't understand and she could not explain, but she was good at learning words, mimicry, and later understanding. We had her try and speak to our more warlike guests, and she told us that all they would say was that the darkness had come. From the disabled ships trying to attack us, we did learn something better. Written languages run through our bio-AIs until we could translate their files. Beyond star charts for navigation, personal journals, what looked extremely close to pulp magazines, we found some history texts. The Andromeda Galaxy was incredibly densely populated, bigger than our own, but fractured far more than we'd ever been. Some 20-odd star systems, and a nation was considered a great power. Of the old Terran nations, even places as small as Monaco or San Marino had at least 40 colonies. The biggest nation had nearly 100, and therefore what counted for interstellar diplomacy usually happened there. We'd thus far been in the edge regions, where few colonies have yet to be established. So we set the course for the biggest star nation of the Andromeda Galaxy, and its capital, where the HFY, which was the local most commonly used name for their galaxy, Star Council held court, where any nation worth its salt sent representatives. Naturally, mankind wanted to speak with them all. To say our arrival was a positive first encounter would be a lie. Their biggest warships were dwarfed by the Life Ericsson. The only reason we weren't attacked outright was the signal we were sending. Translated into their primitive radio signaling with their most common languages, the old message of terror was sent. We come in peace. Which, while making them deeply on edge as it seemed our single exploration ship could have taken on every warship in the galaxy without taking much, if any damage, was a good message. We were received very nicely, our small friend acting as our translator, me, the colonel in charge of ship security, the head researcher, the ship's mayor, with it being more of a small city at that point, and the expedition leader, the admiral. We were led into the common hall, where representatives of thousands of species were waiting for us, anxiously. The admiral gave a speech, with subtitles holographically shown for those incapable of understanding any human language, which was basically every alien except our little nameless friend. At first they were intrigued, then confused, then terrified. The aliens who had let us in begged us to leave, but we demanded an explanation. We wanted to know what the big problem is. It was agreed that we deserved to know. A small scroll, ancient parchment, was brought out and shown to us. The admiral read it and translated it for us. It was a religious text, supposedly accepted in all known religions in Andromeda as a true prophecy. It spoke of the terrible emptiness, a galaxy without true life, only monsters, with eldritch technology and unknowable intent, with morals and ethics completely alien to all other life. It warned of the endless depravity, the horrors, the evils that lurked there, waiting to be unleashed. We were told that on nearly every world, a monolith is engraved with the exact same words, a warning, with a star map that showed how to identify the emptiness as the Milky Way galaxy. Having read that, they begged us to leave. The high king of their most powerful nation bowed on all his 6 legs, pleading with us to leave. We would have left there and then, but they said something. They asked us if we were done with our little friend and if they could eat her. Now the sort of slave she was clicked, they ate sentient life forms. Life was sacred to us Terrans, as it was so rare, but to them, life forms defeated had little value, for it was so common. Slaves were killed for sport, eaten, ripped apart, and turned to art, we were told. And they scoffed at us for the strange, inscrutable morals we had. Needless to say, we didn't exactly like that. We asked them where we could find more of our little friend. They said her race was almost extinct, being too clever to be good slaves, and too slowly growing to be good livestock. We demanded all of them, and made it quite clear what would happen if we were not obeyed. Some few thousands were left and were handed over, if we'd only leave as soon as possible after that. We released the prisoners we had taken, only to find them executed for failing to kill us. We didn't like that. We returned to emptiness, to the Milky Way with new friends, and a story of horror, a universe full of wondrous life, and it was considered cheap. It was considered small. Sentient life was considered worth nothing. We settled our avian friends on a world they liked, confused as they were about the whole ordeal, and they were grateful, so happy to be cared about, so surprised to have been saved from extinction were they, that they abandoned who they were before and adopted Terran mindsets, Terran culture, and Terran love of life. Our little nameless friend, I adopted her. I named her Esme, from a character out of an ancient Terran book that I had been read to sleep by during my childhood. I watched her grow up, and one day we sat together as the refurbished Leif Erikson, flagship of the Dark Fleet, passed by the planet Arlo, where her people had settled. 100,000 ships, all armed to the teeth, were going to leave the emptiness. The Dark Liberation, politicians and media called it. Life was precious, life was important, and the people of the Milky Way would not stand idly by and watch as those who cared so little would destroy so much. The emptiness had sent the darkness, and the prophecy would be fulfilled.